welcome to this explainer. Today, we're actually going to journey into the quiet echoes of ancient history to uncover a hidden figure who profoundly shaped the biblical world. You know, the narrative of history usually moves like a sweeping desert wind, carrying us from one monumental peak to another, from the call of Abraham to the laughter of Sarah to the binding of Isaac. But today, we're going to pause in the valleys between those peaks to look at a life lived entirely in the shadows. We're looking at Keturah.
Okay, let's just listen to this really simple, almost unceremonious introduction. Quote, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah, and that's it. No fanfare whatsoever. It drops her right into a household immediately after the monumental era of Sarah has passed. Abraham was an old man by now, heavy with grief, yet still holding on to this massive promise that he'd be the father of a multitude of nations. Isaac had his own tent, so Abraham was essentially alone with his wealth, his flocks, and his God. And right into this quiet space, Keturah arrives.
Just imagine the emotional landscape she had to navigate here. You have the giant center stage story of Abraham and Sarah, and then you have Keturah, the second wife, stepping into the twilight of the patriarch's life. She's walking into a household that is absolutely saturated with history, with miracles, and for sure, with the lingering shadow of Sarah, a woman whose miraculous conception literally defined their entire faith. Keturah faced the deep challenge of figuring out her place in a story where someone else was already the literal mother of the covenant.
Now, what's really fascinating here is her actual name. Keturah is derived from the Hebrew root for incense or fragrance. In the ancient biblical world, incense was burned slowly. It rose quietly to the heavens, completely unseen but profoundly felt. And honestly, that's exactly how her life operated. She was a slow-burning, quiet offering in the desert, bringing warmth, companionship, and this incredible renewed vitality to a man who had already endured the ultimate tests of faith.
Chapter 2. 6 Sons in the Shadows.
Look at that number, 6. While Sarah waited literally decades and decades for just one single heir, Keturah quickly bore 6 vibrant sons. Abraham was promised that his seed would be as uncountable as the stars, right? Well, through Keturah, we see this incredible, staggering, physical manifestation of God's promise coming to life right there in the middle of the desert camp.
Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, these aren't just, dry genealogical statistics to breeze right past. These were 6 real boys growing up in the desert. She nursed them. She watched them grow. She taught them the ways of Yahweh. And she had to instill in them the dignity of carving their own path. And really, that last part, carving their own path, is exactly where her real struggle begins.
Because this creates just an immense emotional burden. On one side, you have Isaac, the primary covenant heir. On the other, Keturah's 6 sons, the descendants of the flesh. She's raising the sons of a living legend, but she has to do it knowing the absolute unyielding prophecy that Isaac alone was the chosen heir of Canaan. Through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Imagine that tension. How on earth does a mother reconcile her fierce love for her 6 boys with the absolute boundaries of a divine plan that explicitly excludes them from the primary inheritance?
Chapter 3. Sent to the East.
The unyielding boundaries of that divine plan were about to come to a heartbreaking climax. Genesis 25 tells us, "But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac, eastward to the east country." Think about that for a second through the eyes of a mother. The inevitable day arrived when Abraham had to sever his household to protect the sanctity of Isaac's inheritance. He bestowed wealth upon them, flocks, gold, maybe even the very spices of their mother's namesake, but ultimately he sent them away.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question. How does a mother let go? Picture the sweeping desert winds as Keturah tearfully embraces her boys. She's watching them pack their camels and ride eastward toward the rising sun. It is a moment of monumental sacrifice. She had to release her greatest loves out into the untamed expanses of the east, trusting them entirely to God's unseen, mysterious plan, believing His providence was somehow better than keeping them close.
Chapter 4. A Tapestry of Nations.
Okay, this is where her story gets absolutely wild, because God's economy wastes absolutely nothing. Keturah actually birthed the very nations that would interact with Israel for millennia. Look at Midian. When a terrified Moses fled Egypt, it was to Midianite tents he ran. He married a Midianite, learned from a Midianite priest named Jethro, and saw the burning bush in Midianite territory. Then there's Jokshan, father of Sheba and Dedan. They became lords of the ancient spice trade, bridging the East and the land of promise, which led directly to the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon. And Shua? His descendant is Bildad the Shuhite, literally one of the friends philosophizing with Job in his deep suffering.
Because the truth is, the grand narrative absolutely needs the background. Without Keturah's lineage, there's no Jethro to advise Moses, there is no Midianite wilderness to forge the deliverer of Israel. Her quiet, unseen faithfulness in the shadows birthed the completely essential secondary characters of salvation history.
Chapter 5. The Dignity of Obscurity.
Let's zoom out from the ancient Near East for a minute and ask what Keturah's story means for us today. We live in an era where we're basically desperate to have that Isaac mentality, right? We all want to be the promised one, center stage, the indispensable star that the whole story revolves around. But the reality? The vast majority of us are called to the Keturah reality. We're called to embrace the dignity of the unseen secondary role, doing the quiet, everyday background work that the grand tapestry of history relies upon entirely.
So the crucial takeaway here is this: God doesn't measure significance by visibility. If you ever feel like your life is just a footnote, or that your efforts are constantly getting overshadowed by the Sarahs and Isaacs around you, Keturah's story offers some really profound comfort. Your quiet devotion, your daily faithfulness, and honestly even your heartbreaks, just like Keturah letting her sons go, are intimately, perfectly woven into the divine mechanics of history.
When Abraham finally breathed his last, the scriptures tell us that Isaac and Ishmael buried him. True to her life in the shadows, Keturah isn't even mentioned at his funeral. She just remains in the background, a silent witness to the closing of an era. But the fragrance lingers.
Her legacy? It's astonishing. You might not see her name in bold print at the funeral, but you can hear the bells of the camel caravans of Sheba. You can see a bush burning without being consumed out in Midian. You can read the deep philosophical poetry of Job. Her fragrance lingered over the ancient world for centuries, proving once and for all that in God's plan, there are absolutely no minor characters, only essential souls, placed with perfect precision.
Let's end this explainer by asking ourselves a pretty big question. What is your role in the divine canvas? What if our ultimate calling isn't necessarily to be remembered by history, but to faithfully and quietly shape the history of tomorrow right from the shadows? Take a page from Keturah's book, embrace the dignity of the unseen, and trust that your fragrant offering is rising exactly where it needs to go. Thank you so much for joining me for this journey into the quiet echoes of the past.